Paul Penansky also brought us a new activity guide. Oh, this is for the fall. Did this just come out, Paul?
Nope, this is a repeat. This one actually came out in August, I believe.
That's
So
what I thought.
yeah, we have another one that'll come out in December for the winter months then.
We'll have to have you back in December.
Works for me.
Talk about what's happening in the winter. Was there something specific you wanted to get to on this?
Nope, just brought you one for just general conversation.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Travis Block is with us as well, Public Works Director for the city, right, Travis?
That is correct.
And you have a lot of work on your hands in terms of cleanup. Boy, you guys got that temporary dike up by the plant in a hurry, didn't you?
Yeah, we were able to enlist the service of the contractor, and we got that up in, several hours. I think by around noon, we pretty much had the bulk of it installed. I think the last time in 2014 maybe lent a little experience to that. Helped out a little bit.
Yeah, it looked like a regular truck parade over there with all the guys bringing in the dirt.
Yeah.
It was something else. And so Dusty Deans was on our show and was telling us that you guys have become very adept at doing that, unfortunately.
Yes, yeah, we have, unfortunately, but that's kind of the way it goes, I guess, the way the weather patterns are. But yeah, no, it went really well, pretty smooth. It was effective. Obviously, we did have water up onto that berm this time. In 2014, when we constructed it, it was just right up to the berm. But this time, we did actually have water up onto that berm because the river gauge, I think, was about around a half a foot or so from the 2010 level. So we would have had, give or take, around a foot of water flowing over our current berm.
And as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys would really like to put up a concrete wall.
Yeah, correct. That's one of the options. We've been discussing, and we'll have more conversation with going forward. Something maybe more of a kind of a longer term sustainable, and not that this couldn't be turned into that type of thing, but along with the concrete wall would also provide some sort of bank stabilization, because there's a little bit of issues there with that. There is kind of what they refer to as a cut bank in that situation, which means as the river keeps kind of scouring, it keeps cutting more of that out each year. Last year, as a result of the 2014 flooding event, I had to install a little bit of additional riprap down there on that bank, because as we had installed some in 2010, and then that area to the north of it was scoured out and cut, so then we put a little bit more in. And I would assume when the waters recede, we may see a little bit more of that cutting action. So that'll be something that would have to be addressed kind of continually going forward. And a larger project like that we would look to potentially work some of that type of stuff in there to address that too.
But the DNR is the agency that you need to work with on this?
That is correct. I did, through the last efforts, I had to obtain a permit from the Department of Natural Resources, a waterway permit to work within that waterway. So you have to provide them the scope of your project, and then they issue a permit. And then also did have to get a review from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The project with the riprap, they didn't have any involvement in it because you weren't filling or such a waterway. But with a long-term large thing like of a concrete wall, there may need to be, that would probably obviously need to be revisited again to see if there's any impacts with the Army Corps.
Yeah. Would FEMA have anything involved in this too?
I don't know initially with that, but I do know there is some potential for flood mitigation funding. When I was working with the riprap project, and after the 2014 event, I was talking with the DNR area hydrologist, and there's some flood mitigation funding. So you would have to submit a project. The way I look at it from talking with him is you submit a project and then see how that scores, because it's a competitive process with some other projects around, and then see how that ranks out, and then see if you would be eligible for I think it was that one was up to a 50% cost match, I think, on that project that he was discussing with me.
Yeah, Teepee Tonka Park is still closed and probably will be for the foreseeable future. We'll get Paul's opinion on that in our next segment, and we'll come back and talk more about cleanup from the flooding here in 2016. Everything seems to be somewhat back to normal, but we'll talk about that when AM Minnesota. Northland Buildings. For quality post-frame construction, head to their website, northlandbuildings.com. AM Minnesota continues in seconds.
If you are a grower, they know precisely what you need. CHS Yield Point Services. And how do they know that? Because CHS Yield Point specialists write expert prescriptions that make your planting rates and fertilizer applications more precise than ever. With the high cost of inputs, this cutting-edge technology really pays off. Give Mike or Logan a call at 507-528-2175 in Claremont and discover precisely what kind of yield your land is capable of producing.
Wow. How's that for timely? Speaking of Claremont, I'm going to give you a warning over at Claremont Way. Jerry Grosskreutz will be over there this afternoon broadcasting. That's right. The annual soybean harvest broadcast from 1 until 3 this afternoon. Will be over at the Roger and Rhonda Toquam Farm over by Claremont. They're great people, those Toquams. Awesome. Anyway, Jerry will be there broadcasting live from the Toquam Farm, brought to you by Central Farm Service, Cash-Wise Foods in Owatonna, AgStar Financial, Dodge County Corn and Soybean Growers, CHS in Claremont and Rochester, Claremont Service Center in Alcorn Clean Fuels in Claremont. The Claremont Insurance Agency also involved in the broadcast this afternoon. Again, that's 1 until 3. 1 until 3. Travis Block is with us. He's the Faribault Public Works Director. The Parks and Recreation Director, Paul Penansky, is also with us today. We're talking a bit about flood cleanup. The two areas that got hit the hardest were the water plant area and Teepee Tonka Park. Am I right?
That's
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Faribault
Yes.
Willenville obviously had some issues, and you had water. Did it get up over the bridge on 2nd Avenue? I know you closed 2nd Avenue.
No, I did not get up over the bridge. We closed 2nd Avenue because there was water coming up through some storm drain network.
Yeah.
It was backing up through that.
No, well, it was good that you did it before it got over the bridge. Is what I'm kind of driving at there. That area also, well, you couldn't even tell there was a dam there.
No, you could not. It looked like just one big lake.
It was quite the sight. Wanted to touch on the compost site because that's behind the water plant.
That is correct. The compost site is currently closed. The berm that surrounds that portion of the facility there in the back part of our grounds, there was a breach in that, so river water did infiltrated that area and filled that up. As the river recedes, that water will then drain back out of there, so we're kind of in a waiting game to for Mother Nature to help us out a little bit. So as the river drops, then that water will go back out of there, and I don't have a firm time frame on that, but hopefully sometime here in October, maybe the latter part, we can resume services there, and we'll do everything we can in around that area to prepare it so we can get residents being able to use that again as soon as we can.
Meanwhile, is there another site that you're contemplating?
We do not have anything currently. Folks can also take yard waste to the Rice County. They have a site. I don't know the particulars on their hours, but if you contact them for their information, that is another option.
Yep, that is your probably only other option.
At this time, correct.
Would be the Rice County site. So Teepee Tonka Park, Paul, you have any estimate as to when that might be available for people?
I would venture to guess it'll be closed most of the rest of the fall here by the time we can get in. Myself and our Keith Walker, our park superintendent, did walk around yesterday just to take some pictures and stuff. The park is still flooded, water's still running across parts of the park still, so it's not totally receded all the way down yet. I am guessing by the time everything gets firm enough down that we can get vehicles in there, and then we can get proposals to get repairs made, we're looking at least at the end of the year. Hopefully we can get it done this fall so that next spring we can open up as normal. Otherwise it could bleed over into next spring by the time all the repairs can get made in there.
So you haven't really been able to get a sense of whether you're going to have to replace fencing, that sort of thing.
Well, we have gotten into to see that. We have not been able to get contractors in there to take a look at getting proposals and stuff on it yet, but there is a fair amount of fence on the ball fields that will need to be replaced. Some of the fence will be able to be, we think, reinstalled. We did, after the last couple of floods, each time we try and add more and more of a higher gauged fence on there, as well as posts. So that has held up a little bit better in some areas, but there are also other areas that as the water pushes through at its maximum, that we are, it doesn't matter how strong the fence is, it's just pushing logs and trees and whatever through there as it flows through there, and it just knocks it all over. So we've got a few areas where it needs to be totally replaced and a few areas we think we can fix it. As far as fencing goes, We probably have more road damage this time than we did the last time. Not really sure why. It's just, you know, in 2014 we had very little road damage. 2010 we had a lot of road damage. This time we seem to have more like a 2010 level of road damage in there, so we'll have to get back in and do some work on the gravel roads that are down there at Teepee Tonka Park. So.
And this was only a couple of weeks after this council, I know, approved redoing the bridge there.
Yep, and that's a little bit of a separate project, but they're also, we've already received word that as soon as the water levels go down even more, they just want to inspect around the bridge to make sure that there's not washouts on either end of the bridge down there. So we're kind of in a wait right now mode. As soon as the water recedes the rest of the way through the park, probably the front third of the park when you're coming in, that's where the water first enters the park. It actually comes from the tree line on the west end of the park, across the park and across that first softball field when you come in, and then tries to work its way back to the river. So that's the first area that floods. It doesn't actually come up over the riverbank in that area. It comes around the back side of the park. So as soon as we can get in there and start taking a look at get into more of that area, we'll have a better feel for exactly what needs to happen in there.
How about the building?
The building itself was underwater to about 5-foot level. We were able to open and close all the doors. Pretty much everything that was in the building is probably trashed. Everything's been removed and moved around just from floating and all the river water in there. So we'll have to go in there and clean all that stuff out and toss most of it into the trash. A few things may be able to be saved if we can re-disinfect them. But for the most part, a lot of the stuff in that room will end up having to go to waste.
So we're talking bases and maybe a shocking machine.
Yep. There's a freezer in there that'll go, a mini refrigerator that'll go. There is a fair amount of football equipment. BA does store their football equipment because they practice down there.
Oh, sure.
So that all those blocking dummies and some of their pads and their base markers, those all flooded out and soaked up. I mean, a lot of those have foam inside of the plastic coatings, and so I'm sure that that's all soaking wet and probably needs to be disposed of. Our local rugby team, the box spring group, they also had equipment down there, so that also flooded out, so they'll probably be losing all that equipment as well too. We need to get them in there and let everybody know that their equipment's gone, and they'll have to start working on replacement of that as well then too. So the building itself seems to have fared again. We don't see any real damage on that. Again, we couldn't get all the way around the building yet with the water levels where they're at, but from walking through the inside of the building, it seems to have survived yet another round.
Yeah. Well, since 2010, this is the third, right?
The third big flood.
Actually, in
yep.
Teepee Tonka, you had some in August.
We actually flooded 2 different times in August, but minor levels. I mean, it did
Right.
very, very, very minimal damage. We just had to close the park down for a few days for the water to recede and dry back out. We didn't have to do other repairs on that, but yep. So this is actually the third time this year it kind of teased us and then teased us again and then took us down. So it was been a hard year for Teepee Tonka Park.
Yes, it has. Slavin Park.
Slavin Park didn't see a lot of damage. The water went all the way up and around it, so it did cover a lot of the park. But the biggest thing there will be getting up there and getting some raking done once we can get all through the park. You get a lot of debris that floats in, and then as the water recedes, that debris sits there. So there's lots of sticks, lots of long grasses, some trash, just stuff that kind of comes in and rides along the water, and then just ends up sitting into the park there when it's all receded. And North Alex has that same issue. We had a lot of water in North Alex that washed all the way up and around the shelters. So I know we've got there's actually a wedding up in the park this weekend, and so we're trying to get some staff in there to do some sweeping up there, just so that they've got a nice site and stuff in there. That park is one of the first areas that the water receded back on, so hopefully it's starting to get firmed up enough we can get some equipment in there.
Yeah, Travis, I know Senator Amy Klobuchar came to Faribault on Sunday. I see you had a chance to give her a bit of a tour over at the water.
Yes, she was touring, the various areas throughout the state with damage in the region, and made the treatment plant one of the stops, and was looking at the protective measures that we took there with the berm, and just had some good conversation about that, and and the importance of constructing something like that, and what that saves in dollars, when you're looking at $28 million expansion that upgrade project that we did, a few years back, and what you have in those type of measures to preserve that and the importance of that. So that was it was a good visit for to get out and see, for her just to see that stuff firsthand and try and keep that momentum going forward with that type of a relief effort.
I'm sure she didn't make any promises, but she seemed positive toward the possibility of having a permanent structure there.
Yeah, no, obviously there's no promises made, but yes, she, it was very positive visit, and like you said, she just discussed and was discussing with everyone there that the importance of those type of measures, and just that we need to be doing what we can to preserve critical infrastructure like that. So it was a very good visit.
So the berm meant that there was absolutely no damage down there.
That is correct. We did not receive any damage at the facility. Like I said before, without that, we would have had water. The river would have been flowing right through the site, as it did in 2010.
And I believe you were taking on, because of all the water, more through the facility, right?
That is correct. We did have to implement some bypass pumping, so when that situation happens, you have to call the Minnesota State Duty Officer and activate that process to inform them that we were unable to pump to physically put the amount of water that we were taking in to our facility. We were maxed out. We were pushing through right around 14 million gallons a day, and our average is around 4. And 14 is about what our maximum that you could force through that facility. So to help alleviate that, you have to set some pumps out in the system then to just bypass it, so directly pull from the sanitary system and discharge it into the storm, which ultimately goes into the river. So we did that for the minimum amount that we could. Obviously you want to minimize those efforts to reduce any potential environmental impact. So we did that. We were able to suspend that by Saturday morning. So that was a good sight. But we're still yesterday we were still putting through around 9 million gallons. So we're still as the river stays up, we're still sustaining a high flow. So in talking with kind of in our debriefing, was talking with the city engineer Tim Murray, it'll be something that we look forward as we go forward here and come out of this, as the river levels drop, looking to see where the potential avenue is for that water to come into the facility. So that'll be an ongoing project going forward, but it'll be one that we'll be looking at.
Does this put on added problems to the plant itself? If you had to do this over a sustained period of time, I would assume that would be a problem.
Well, yes, it would, because the plant is our average wet weather design is around 7 million gallons. But there is peak design, numbers, but you don't want to be pushing that through there all the time. The biggest thing that it kind of creates a situation with is the biological processes down there, because if you get a lot of that river water is, fairly clean, considering, any other sanitary water, so it doesn't have a lot of biological strength, which creates a dilution situation, which can be challenging to get the biological processes to function properly.
Isn't that interesting, Paul? I see Paul smiling over here.
Using very technical terms for what we know he's talking about.
Yeah. And so what I find interesting, Paul's going, I'm sure glad I'm the Parks and Rec director and not the Public Works director, although you did some of that too, didn't you?
A couple of times, years ago though.
Yeah,
Fortunately, I didn't have to deal with any flooding during the times I was there. So.
No. So correct me if I'm wrong. 2010, we had a bigger flood than we did this time.
Correct.
But we were close to those levels.
That is correct.
2014 was the next one.
That is
There's
correct.
nothing in 2012. Some reason it was in my head that it was like every other year.
No, we did in 2012 though. I think we did around that time frame. We did. I remember one time put up, when I was at the wastewater facility, we put up a few sandbags one time as things were kind of but it was not. There was no threat of danger past that.
Okay. My memory obviously is not what it once was. And then I'm sure you've all looked at the history books. That ever happened before in a decade?
Well, I don't know, it seems that the 100-year flood events are coming every few years. So it's rewriting the history books, I guess, with the frequency that we're experiencing these things.
Yeah, no question about it. Well, Paul, we've talked about it many times. Many times. I know you're probably tired of me bringing it up, but it just boggles my mind that FEMA does not allow the city to, because you've asked them repeatedly, right, if you could move the fields to higher ground, and they say no.
Yep, it's a similar issue to what the wastewater treatment plant has to deal with. It's having to go through flood mitigation to be able to move those ball fields. To receive the FEMA funding, we have to reconstruct what we had. So they come down and they evaluate where we're at, and so if that's the issue, we end up going back and having to reconstruct the fields again down at Teepee Tonka Park. And
they can't just give you the money that it would have cost to reconstruct, and you can use it to move it.
We have looked into that, and that does not work with the way that through the flood mitigation funds. If you can get into those funds, then there is the possibility of some matching funds to be able to do some of that. So we have looked as a city. We've done some preliminary planning. We do have a park on the south end of town, down on Prairie Avenue down there, on the very south end of town, that's large enough to hold probably at least three of the four ball fields that we have at Teepee Tonka Park. So we're trying to determine if that's sufficient size for us to be able to completely move the parks down there, or the fields down there at some point. The grass turf down at Teepee Tonka seems to have held up really well. I mean, you get a lot of river bottom and silt and stuff all over. What it actually does at Teepee Tonka, boy, that park grows like crazy. It's like fertilizing it with a good dose, so the grass grows like crazy afterwards. So that seems to come back really well each and every time. It's the ball fields themselves and the fence work that takes all the damage down there.
And we've already discussed the issue with a permanent structure. It's more the Do you think it's more the DNR than any other agency because there's a natural waterway and they just as soon not see anything done because of that?
Well, yeah, the DNR obviously will be the biggest agency they're working with it because of the the natural waterway components. But when you start looking at a permanent, just this experience I've had, when you start looking at a permanent flood structure like a concrete wall, where the Army Corps comes in is because you have the potential to displace a floodplain. So that's where they would come into. So if you're looking at some, constructing something X number of feet high and X number of gallons that normally would have been in this area,
right.
Is it moving somewhere? So they start becoming involved a little bit more when that, and so that's why I would be reaching out to them as well if something such as a concrete wall would be.
And you're talking about a significant concrete wall, right?
Yeah, I don't know, what you'd be looking at, but something that berm was several feet high, so obviously you're going to want to be going well and above what you experienced in 2010 was kind of the historic height, all-time high, but you're obviously going to want to go a little higher than that because
Never know.
Yeah, and you're not going to have really many options to add on to that once in a hurry once you get that built.
Yeah. Wow. I don't envy you guys.
This is the and duties as assigned. You don't really know what you're getting into. You just have to deal with it when it gets here and do the best you can to move forward and inconvenience as few people as possible.
Well, I will say
absolutely.
The good thing is you guys are in place when this happened before. So as we noted earlier, you have a track record. You understand what's going on.
Yes, and it was from looking at it from our perspective. It went very smooth. I mean, Dusty Deans did a great job, leading the whole efforts, and it was just really good to see how everybody involved. Actually, it was pretty seamless thing. Things just started, happening and such, and all the staff involved and everybody, kind of how we've been through this before, and just knew kind of where to go, what to look at, and kind of what to try and anticipate. So.
Any idea, Travis, what that temporary berm costs?
In 2014, that cost was about $15,000 from the contracted services, and then there was some stuff involved, so it was approximately $20,000. So you'd be looking at a little bit above that.
Sure.
For this time frame, but so somewhere around that mark.
Less than I would have guessed.
Mm-hmm.
And do you recall what the damages were in Teepee Tonka last time?
At Teepee Tonka, we did about $75,000 worth of damage down there between fences and ag line. Part of it is some of the radiuses on the ball fields had to be recut back in. It looks like the radius is held this time, so we're anticipating the repairs this time should be less than they were last time. Plus, some of that heavier gauged fence that we put in held up better than some of our previous. So we have probably about 2/3 or half to 2/3 of the fence that we had to replace last time. So we're anticipating the cost being down this time from the last repair, but until we get at them, by the time you throw inflation in there, it's really hard to tell until we actually get quotes on it.
Yep. Well, the governor is declaring a disaster declaration. Of course, Rice County will be included in that disaster declaration, and that qualifies the city for some of the funding
Correct.
to do the wall if you're approved, and to fix the ballpark as it was.
Correct. So, yep, hopefully someday we will see those remove out of there, because you'll see a whole lot less expense and downtime for Teepee Tonka Park if we get some of those ball fields moved.
Yeah, and Dusty made a perfect point last week in saying, you know, it's nice that we have that there for a place for the water to go.
Absolutely. There's in a lot of communities, one of the first places you want to flood, you want your parks to flood. Even though that seems like a lot of money, it's a lot less than if we took an entire row of houses out, or their basements, or their walls caved in. I mean, that park, being as big as it is, takes a lot of water on before the level starts to climb again.
So does this affect the plants like Faribault Foods that uses a lot of water? I just thought of that when you're dealing with those volumes.
It can't, you know, in 2010 it did, because our facility was taken offline, but like in this situation, everybody, you know, we didn't limit anybody, you know, to production or restrictions or anything like that. They experienced a power outage, so they were kind of out of production for a couple days, but other than that, we didn't limit anyone this time, because we were still able to kind of hold our own.
And I had heard that there was some concern. Obviously, the Woolen Mill had, I believe, in the last flood, some water in their basement.
Yes, I believe they did. I don't know the specifics on what they experienced this time.
Sure.
I guess, but I know that, you know, obviously they had some bagging efforts going on there, and I did, you know, see some sump pumps and stuff at the site there, so I'm assuming they did have some water in there.
Well, thanks, Travis, for coming in. I know you're a busy guy. Appreciate it very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Should probably get you in to talk about snow plowing. Oops, I didn't say what I just said today. And Paul, thanks for coming in.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. That concludes today's edition of AM Minnesota. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about county highway damage from the floods. Dennis Luby, Rice County's highway engineer, will be my guest tomorrow. There are 3 roads, at last report I had from Dennis anyway, that were still closed in Rice County. We'll talk about that on AM Minnesota tomorrow. KDHLAM, Faribault, Minnesota.